Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel TCNT, which stands for True Crime and Trials, and today it's the Mark Sievers trial and the penalty phase. The court feels, I mean, I'm not actually there, but you can just tell it's filled with nerves and everybody's anxious, and you know, nobody knows which way this is going to go. I mean, either side family know which way they would like it to go, but I mean, it does deserve the death penalty, but I don't know how the jury are going to decide, because I wouldn't want to have to decide this. I just wouldn't. So the judge starts by talking to the jury and about the two decisions they've got to make, pointing out that first-degree murder is punishable by either life in prison without parole or the death penalty. And emphasis is being made to the jury that their death penalty decision has to be made by it being beyond a reasonable doubt. If there is the slightest bit of doubt there, or one of them disagrees, then Mark will get life in prison without parole and he won't get the death penalty. So they've all got to be together on this. There's got to be no doubt. Right. And before I get into the opening statements, I took a few pictures of Mark before the judge started talking, and it was like a gallery of the many faces of Mark Sievers. One minute he was laughing, then he was, you know, stern-faced, then he was crying. It was just crazy. So anyway, the state's opening statement, they go through all the evidence again that I've personally heard 1,000 times over from Roger's trial and now this one. And basically saying all the evidence, all the testimony points to Mark orchestrating the whole thing, which he's been found guilty of doing. There's two aggravating factors, that's a hard word to say, that the jury have to look at. The first is pecuniary gain, which is monetary gain. Obviously, he was going to inherit a lot of money from the life insurance policies and the trusts, which he was the sole beneficiary for. I mean, at one point, $420,000 was mentioned, and obviously the $2.5 million one. And obviously the other aggravating factor is homicide and it being premeditated, which it was because Mark planned it out with Curtis. And I mean, the poor state attorney, I mean, she was sick. She was full of cold. Her voice was going, but she still, you know, finished the statement and, you know, finished by saying the evidence and testimony proves this was planned in a calm and conscious way. Mark began the process that led to his wife's murder. He planned it and he paid Wright $600 to do it. So the defence, this wasn't the same attorney that did the trial. It's the one that's been sat there beside Mark. He seemed nervous, he sounded nervous. He didn't seem to be able to get his points across smoothly. It just felt messy. And the only points I actually got from it was that they have 4 witnesses, which they're all Mark's family. His birth mother, his stepmother, his stepsister, and his brother. I mean, the statement was rubbish, and his whole point was that the jury needed to choose life over death. I mean, and as I say, I wouldn't like to have to decide someone's someone's fate of whether they live or die. I mean, I know Mark took that away from Teresa, but that's what he did. And for me personally, it would be a hard decision, but based on the law and the evidence, it all point, you know, he should get the death penalty. But then I don't know if I, you know, having that on my conscience, I don't know. So for the state, Mary Ann Groves gets up, who is Teresa's mother. She's prepared a victim impact statement. I mean, she looked tired, she looked worn out, she was upset, she was sad, I mean, she's human, she's like, you know, her daughter was murdered, she's just sat through 2 trials. So, you know, I just hope that they get justice for Teresa and she can rest and at least have some closure and be able to move on a little. She starts by saying the weekend that they all spent together when Teresa, Mark and the kids were with her and the others, the weekend that Teresa was murdered, is now so very precious to her, because she didn't know at the time that that would be the last weekend that she got to hug her, that she got to see her and that she got to speak to her. And they took a family photo that weekend, and now Mary Ann will not take any more family photos because Teresa isn't here anymore. She said of Teresa that Teresa lifted people up and tried to teach them to be the best people that they could be. She was an extraordinary woman who had a lot of compassion. And her mother called her the modern day Mother Teresa. And she knew Teresa would grow up and achieve amazing things. And at this point, the camera goes to Mark, who has dry tears again, which is starting to really piss me off now. He can't even cry convincingly. I mean, I've read comments here, there and everywhere of people saying the same damn thing, and it's just, it's infuriating to watch. She volunteered and helped pregnant young girls who had got pregnant due to violence. She taught them how to be mothers and love their babies, and she would invite them round to her house, you know, for little get-togethers and things. She also helped children in Africa, and she even adopted 2 boys in Africa, but she couldn't bring them back to America, so she funded their schooling, provided funds for housing and schooling, and she also wrote to them as well. She provided free medical for the homeless, and she would sit with them and pray and talk to them. Then it comes out that she'd also landed a role on a TV show called Pathways to Healing, which she had filmed several episodes for, but obviously have never been aired. And a couple of videos have been played for the court of Teresa talking, and it just hit home. I haven't heard her speak before, and actually seeing her there, it just hit home of what a senseless loss this is for her daughters, her mother, her sister, her brother. I mean, it's just so sad. And you know, the biggest loss is on her 2 daughters, who absolutely adored their mother. And the girls have been robbed of her, they've been robbed of their home, they've been robbed of their pets and all their possessions. I mean, life is, I don't even know how those poor girls must be feeling right now, and how their life will be to come. And I just hope to God that they get the guidance and support to enable them to be great women like their mother was. You know, she won't see them graduate, she won't see them get married, she won't see them birth children. It's just so sad, and hearing it from Teresa's mother, it just makes it even more. And then she says she has lost her precious Teresa. The void is unimaginable. She was everyone's rock and joy. A big part of Mary Ann died when Teresa died, and she will miss her for the rest of her life. And in the videos of Teresa, it just shows what a confident, beautiful and amazing woman she was. And it's I've got goosebumps now. It's just so awful. So the defence comes up now, and the first is Bonnie Sievers, which is Mark's biological mother. And Mark has 2 sisters and a brother, and they ask her to describe what Mark was like when he was younger. She said Mark was fun, curious, loving and kind, and he still is. And as he grew older, he developed a way of wanting to take care of people. He was sensitive, and he wrote a journal. Mark had saved his allowance to buy his older sister some diamond earrings so she would fit in with the others at high school. As a teenager, he worked in a homeless shelter. Now, hearing this from someone who was being convicted of first-degree murder of his wife, and seeing the evidence and the testimony, it's just... I can't even describe it. It's just mind-blowing that someone who is at the moment being talked about as though he was a saint is just... It's literally unbelievable. And they all say it about him. He went to school and became a licensed practical nurse, which is LPN. Mark always has a bounce in his step, and he always had a smile. When he worked at a casino, they nicknamed him Smiley because he was always smiling, which sounds ludicrous. He also took care of his grandfather, who lived until he was 102 and a half. He had diabetes, and Mark would go and give him his insulin shots because Bonnie didn't like doing it. And then Mark saved up to take his grandfather on a cruise because that's all his grandfather had ever wanted to do. And they show a picture of Mark and Teresa on their wedding day, and pictures of Mark with the girls and girls on their own. And then they talk about what kind of father Mark was, and he took the girls to all their activities that they did. He helped with school plays to help build the sets and everything. And then it gets mentioned about Bonnie divorcing from Mark's father in the 70s, and she now has a new partner called Melanie, which at that point it just kind of took me aback because I wasn't expecting her to say a woman's name. I mean, it's no prejudice whatsoever. It was just a bit of a shock. But Melanie thinks of Mark as her son as well. Bonnie is not aware of Mark ever being arrested before now. So then they're back on to Mark Sievers' children, and Bonnie and Melanie would have the girls on weekends. And I've wrote in my notes that at that point, as I've said before, seeing photos of the girls that I hadn't seen before, and hearing how close these girls obviously were with both parents, and they've lost one, and now their dad has been convicted of murdering her. I really do feel for them both. And it's at this point where I was wavering about the death penalty being given to Mark, because their mother was murdered, taken away from them by their own father. And now I can't even pretend or imagine to know how they feel, but I don't know how they feel about their father and if they are still sticking by him, and to not be able to see him ever again either. I just worry about more damage being done on top of the damage that's already been done. Anyway, Bonnie visited Mark every week in prison, sometimes twice a week, and she loves him very much. She will continue to support him. He's her baby, and she loves her son. Next is Scott Sievers, Mark's younger brother, and he's married with 3 children, and Mark was groomsman at his wedding. Mark spoils his brother's kids, and they still remain close when Mark left Missouri to go live in Florida. And Mark did have an older sister who died, which was tough for all of them, obviously. Mark had when Bonnie and Mark's dad split up, Mark initially lived with his dad. They all did, and then Mark and Scott both went to go live with their dad and his stepmom. Then he says Mark is a very loving and supportive father, and he will continue to support Mark come what may. The cross-examination asked Scott about when Mark was in Missouri for Curtis Wright's wedding, and asked, did Mark come and see you? You know, saying that, based on Scott saying how much Mark loved his nephews, why didn't he come and visit you while he was there? And then the state pointed out that although Scott said that Mark adored his daughters, they asked Scott, you know, you said that Mark loved his daughters, and he agreed, and it was left at that. And that, I think that was to point out that if Mark loved his daughters as much as these guys are saying he did, how could he have killed their mother? How could he have taken their mother away from them? Next is Connie Reese. It's his stepsister, and she is also one of his oldest friends. Her mother and his father were married when they were both around 11 to 12 years old, and Mark has always been a constant support in her life. And she said he's the glue that keeps the family together. She's indebted to him because he supported her through her battle with cancer. She said that Mark is a superhero father. His family was his universe. He was loving, affectionate and kind, and since his arrest she's had phone calls and written letters, and she loves him with all her heart and will continue to do so. Again, the state get up and say, you say that the girls are his universe. She said yes, and he said so he would do anything to protect them, and she said, I guess so. Again, going back to when Mark told Curtis that he wanted Teresa dead because she was having an affair and she was going to leave with the girls, and the girls were in danger. Next is Jenny Weckelman. That's his stepmom, who was married to his father. And they show a photo of her with Mark. Now, his father passed in 1992 when Mark was around 24. So he didn't see Mark graduate, but Jenny was there, and Jenny lives in Florida, and she's lived there since 1995. And Mark actually met Teresa through his older sister Stacey, the one that passed away. She said he's a hands-on father. He loved taking them places and doing things with them. And she has visited Mark in jail every week, and she loves him very much and will continue to support him because she loves him. So that's the end of the witnesses. So on to the closing statements, and it begins with the prosecution. And again, they go over all the evidence. Then they start going through the verdict form and the points they need to read and the decisions they need to come to. And, you know, their decision has got to be based on the law, what the law says. It's got to be made without prejudice, without passion, and it's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And going through that it was premeditated. So there's quite a few forms, because if they tick yes, then they move on to the next part, and if they tick yes for that, then they move on to the next part, and if they tick yes for that one, they move on to the last part, which is them agreeing to the death penalty. Obviously, if they'd have said no, it would have stayed wherever they said no, and it would have been life without parole. So the defence, again, start by using Wright's testimony and asking the jury if they really believe what he said was the truth, and also asking the jury if they believed Mark did this for the money. I mean, he did. He did it. I think he did it for the money, and I think something. We don't know if she was having an affair. You know, and then he goes on to say he doesn't know the reasons why they found him guilty of first-degree murder, but did they base their decision on the fact that Mark murdered her for the money? And then he points out the fact that although there was three of them, Rogers, Wright and Mark, he's the only one facing the death penalty. Because obviously Wright's the one who carried out the actual murder and has admitted to it, but he took a plea deal, obviously. And then by finishing saying that the jury have the power over Mark's life or his death, and ask the jury to consider the decision of life without parole. Then the judge reads through every single form, explains it all to them, and if they want any pieces of evidence or need to ask a question, then they have to write it down on a piece of paper, pass it to the bailiff, and the bailiff will take it to the judge. Then the attorneys will be called into court. The judge will read out the question and ask if there's any objections or if they can't have what they've asked for. So now the wait begins. The jury's out for deliberations. People have asked not to go far. You know, I'll leave the numbers and they will be called if the jury comes to a verdict. I don't know. He should get the death penalty, but after hearing about his children, like I've said, it's hard when you think about them. So I will be back with a verdict video. So until then, bye for now.
Knows what's wrong with them if you listen to them. And by the time you're done interviewing them, before you've done any tests, and back then I didn't really have a lot of testing to do, or examine them, you should know what's wrong with the patient also. And so I think with all the technology